All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Gina Waldhorn. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Sports Innovation Lab. About 4 weeks ago, we launched a very important piece of research called the Future of Watching Sports. For years, the Sports Innovation Lab has been talking about the lack of an incentive to innovate the watching experience for fans. And COVID really changed all of that by forcing fans to stay at home and watch sports from their living room. And it's really also forced the industry to transition from the days of a lean back, sit on your couch, watching experience to creating a viewing experience that truly fulfilled the needs and the desires of the fluid fan. And this report dives into the factors contributing to the state of the industry today and the trends, technologies, and processes to get organizations where we believe they need to be. So today we're going to spend some time diving into that report led by Josh Walker, and we've invited 2 industry thought leaders and experts to join us to talk about some of the key tenets of that research, contextualize and share some best practices with us today. So first, I would love to introduce Josh Walker, the president and co-founder of Sports Innovation Lab. Josh is formerly VP of Research at Forrester, and Josh stewards our lab's progressive research practice, and he introduced the world to the concept of the fluid fan. He also leads Sports Innovation Lab's client roster of more than 50 sports brands, properties, technology providers to understand how to connect to the fluid fan. And you may have seen, heard, watched Josh as of late being featured in Sports Illustrated, Synopsis, Future Sports, Sports Pro, and more, as he's really been helping to guide organizations on how to bring fans back safely when the time is right into stadiums and how to innovate that at-home watching experience. So thrilled to have Josh leading us through some of the research and hosting our conversation today. And our 2 guests that are going to be joining Josh in a little bit are first Laura Dennis, who is Senior Vice President of Digital Media for NBC Universal's owned television stations, the division of NBC Universal that includes 42 NBC stations and Telemundo local television stations, as well as their associated website and digital platforms. In this role, Laura spearheads the editorial, design, and product development strategy, as well as the audience development and business operations for all the stations and local networks, websites, mobile apps, social, and distributed platforms. And we really reached out to Laura to join us today because she's doing truly innovative things across NBC Universal, where she balances that tension between catering to the traditional broadcast audience while innovating for the next generation. And she's also employed development and organizational thinking techniques like design thinking to really incentivize and structure innovation, which really makes her perfect for today's conversation. Joining Laura, we have Matt Kogan, who is Senior Manager of Strategy and Corporate Development for Cox Enterprises. And in this role, Matt supports Cox's corporate strategy, diversification, and long-term growth outside the company's core business. And he leads their investment in esports, acquiring a team and a facility in just the past 24 months. Matt truly has an eye towards the future of entertainment and the fan experience. He was a contributor to this report as a member of our leadership board, and he draws on both Cox's legacy broadcast experience as well as his current role in innovating their investment portfolio. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Josh, who's going to introduce us and bring us through some of the core tenets of the research. And then we're going to be welcomed by Matt and Laura to facilitate the conversation as well. As we're going through this, if you have any questions for our guest or for Josh, pop them in the questions field or the chat of the Livestorm platform, and we'll save some time at the end of our conversation to answer some of your questions. So Josh, thanks for leading us.
All right, Gina, thank you so much for setting things up here. What I want to do very quickly was give us some context for having this conversation. I think Gina did a great job of letting you know that, we have been at the Sports Innovation Lab focused on how the industry grows. And we have for a long time talked about how the diehard fan is not the path to growth, but that the fluid fan is, and that fluid fan is different than the diehard fan because they're empowered to choose. They have all this access to media and experiences, and they are continuously evolving. So every time we sort of understand what they're doing, something new happens. For the last 50 years, Sports media innovation has largely been about changing the way that we watch sports. It's been about that live viewing experience. And we at the Sports Innovation Lab have been writing research on this for the last 4 years based on the data that we see in the industry. And that data really focuses on 3 areas of innovation that we've all been focused on. When it comes to live sports, we've seen a tremendous amount of effort, investment, and resources being applied to digital enhancements. You've seen the commercials, you know all about next-gen stats, StatCast, and all the data that we're able to put on the sidebars and underneath and give to the commentators when we're talking about helping the fan understand sports with more data and more graphics around the live stream or broadcast telecast. We've also had tremendous innovation in camera techniques and production, and even the way that the cameras move around the venue. We have them flying on, bars. We have them on movable things around the stadium. We have new arrays that can do 3D, and the camera techniques and the production technology behind those has really started to advance as well. And finally, we've been very focused on this little thing that we carry around in our phone, carry around with us, because we're making that broadcast now available anywhere, anytime through mobile and OTT viewing experiences. So sports media has been innovating, but it's all been innovating around the concept of watching. And why is there so much emphasis from a business model perspective on watching? It's because of a few really important reasons that have been holding the industry back. One is long-term media rights really don't provide the urgency for people to change the way that we develop this product on the telecast. If there's long-term media rights, you protect those rights and you have that money coming in, you really don't need to do things too differently. Two is mobile and OTT, while they're different formats, different sizes, and different transmission, they really haven't been about changing the experience. They've been about making sure that that works just as well as broadcast television. And there's a lot of technical reasons why that's really hard to do. So we haven't had the luxury to mess with that format and change that viewing experience too much. We've been trying to get it right. And the third reason is advertisers still really focus on reach. They really still care about the eyeballs. And as long as the advertisers and the sponsors focus on those eyeballs and those audiences, there's really no incentive to come up with new metrics, come up with new experiences that capture data, do things in a new way, because the advertisers are paying for those 30-second and 15-second and pre-roll commercials. And finally, the diehard fan still wins the day. Even though the fluid fan is the future, the path to growth for this industry, the diehard fans really want that traditional viewing experience. We've seen it so many times, whether it's the puck that's moving or some sort of new enhancement that somebody puts on broadcast. Fans really start to react badly if it's done and executed poorly. But COVID changed that, and I'm really eager to share with you some of the research that came out of this, because in the middle of writing this research, in the middle of collecting the data and working with our Immersive Media Leadership Board, a lot of the experts in the industry, COVID hit. And we were focused on broadcast enhancements. We were focused on a lot of those things we just showed you. We were focused on new cameras, Intel's TrueView, a lot of the technology that's out there that was changing the production. But COVID changed the way that we had to actually think about making new experiences. The industry, though, didn't have the capacity to do that immediately, and they still don't have the capacity to do it today. So we wrote a report. This research is about building the capacity to innovate for the future of sports media. Because what we were able to do in this short period of time is two things. One, we pulled really hard on archival video. We went back to try to create documentaries or highlights or sort of storytelling stuff that didn't require live sports because we didn't have it. And we also focused on digital formats. And that gave language to something at the Sports Innovation Lab where we're like, look, not all digital sports are the same. There's hybrid sports that have humans that really start playing some of these games. You have esports, which is just a competition where real, video game players are competing against one another in a tournament style. You have simulations. We saw this from Sport Radar and others in the industry where you could actually create a whole game based on historical data that could predict the future of a real event. And then you had virtual sports where there's no human actors. You have horses running around a track, interesting stuff, but it's not really the sports that we're used to. This is how we filled the gap when we didn't have live sports. So to not fall back on archives and to not just rely on digital sports as a replacement for the live telecast, we believe at the Sports Innovation Lab that a new organization is needed. And this is why we asked Laura and Matt to join us, because they are at the center of organizations that have to think about this in the future. There's the complex organization that exists today where everybody lives in silos. When you're producing sports media or any media for that example is you have media over here, live events over here, and social over here. The social digital is usually kept somewhere else. The media workflow guys and the production trucks are over here, and the events and live signage and music and entertainment is over there. What the Fluid Fan Studio says is leave those silos in place. Don't try to reinvent the entire organization, but cherry pick from those different areas of expertise and start focusing on developing media that is more participatory, that gives the fans something to do other than just watch. And if there's anything that came out of this report, anything that came out of this research, anything that came from all the different experts that we pulled best practices and recommendations and strategies from, it was this, that we need to stop innovating on just watching and start giving the fans more to do during the live viewing experience. And that requires a new type of organization. It requires a new type of skills that really focuses on participating and participatory media. And the Fluid Fan Studio is our recommendation for doing that. It focuses on 3 different things. The Fluid Fan Studio doesn't focus on demographics and say, hey, we're doing this because we're trying to reach the next generation of 17 to 24-year-olds. It focuses on behaviors. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. It focuses on media convergence. It focuses on bringing together social formats with telecast and broadcast formats, with live event formats, so that you have that media convergence and you bring those audiences together and you give them things to do while they're watching live sports. And finally, it focuses on this balance or this decision between immersion and presence. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a second as well. So the first is something that if you've heard from the Sports Innovation Lab over the last few years, we really believe very strongly that you can't think about the fan as a demographic. You don't think about them as aging fans, the next generation of fans. Think about their motivations and their behaviors. Do they want to bet? Do they want to share on social media? Do they want to compete against their friends? Do they want to make new friends? Do they want to brag and talk trash? When you start identifying the behaviors and stop thinking about the demographic, you can design experiences that really cater to that next generation fan. That is the key to how the Fluid Fan Studio approaches creating new media experiences. The other key is something the industry has learned through its experiments with augmented reality and virtual reality. There's a difference between immersion and presence. And through this research, I learned this for the first time by working with Abe Stein, who's in our organization and focuses on next generation media. He really took his experience with the MIT Media Lab and a lot of the research he's done to say that we have identified a lot of products that are designed for immersion. They're designed to make you feel more immersed in that experience. It's a really interesting concept because you read a good book, you don't feel like you're on paper. You don't feel like you're in the text with the ink, but you are immersed in the story. Presence is the idea of trying to bring the person there, trying to make them feel like they're courtside. And that's what a lot of the early VR stuff did. These are different experiences for the fan. And if you try to do them both, or you're not clear which one you're trying to do, am I trying to teleport my fan there, or am I trying to make them more immersed? You will make bad product decisions. You will make bad design decisions. So the Fluid Fan Studio really knows when to pull on one of these levers and make them part of the remote experience. And then finally, the Fluid Fan Studio really focuses on convergence. I've probably said this word 20 times already today. It's about bringing together different media formats so that it's not just about one push sort of media experience. It's about being interdisciplinary. It's about those different boxes coming together. It's about pulling the best from the live experience, pulling the best from broadcast, and pulling the best from the community and the interactivity of social. Bring it together. Experiment with those formats. It's about having a group that is designed to do rapid and iterative design. Laura will touch on this in a moment about how they do this at NBC Universal. It's about how you can be agile, how you can have MVPs, how you can try things out. And then finally, the studio has to have the latitude to have longer term technology partnerships. We use the term at the Sports Innovation Lab a lot about co-development. How do you bring together your sponsors to create new experiences together that are about platforms, not activation? And when you start thinking about it in those terms, you have a longer term value proposition for the people that are monetizing your experience and your product. That's a lot. It's a lot in a very short period of time, but the report is out there. I encourage you guys to download it off our website. And it wouldn't have been possible without our Immersive Media Leadership Board. When we started this research over a year ago, we brought together people from all over the ecosystem. Matt is on here. Matt and his team at Cox were part of this conversation. They brought in a lot of their thinking about esports, some of the investments they were making in media. We have LiveLike and DraftKings, and we have so many other people that are in our ecosystem that are helping us understand how you balance all this interactivity, participation, community with the traditional business model of getting massive reach and advertising dollars to flow into the business. So I want to thank all of our Immersive Media Leadership Board members, and I want to welcome Laura and Matt to join me now. And I'm happy to also try to answer some of your questions as we move through this part of the conversation. Laura, good to see you.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Matt, thanks for joining as well.
Thank you for having me.
So that was a lot, Matt. I tried to do a whole year worth of research in 20 minutes. Did I do it all right? Were we good?
I think you did a pretty good job. As you mentioned, by the time you got through all the materials, it's a lot to take in and digest. But I think we broke it out into some very distinct categories within the full scale report that I think will hopefully be valuable and interesting for a lot of the attendees today.
Well, we've seen a ton of innovation over the last few weeks, really. I think I was just talking with Amy Latimer, who runs TD Garden, and she walked me through sort of her head space around the pandemic. And I think it's really the same for all of us, which is at first in March, we all thought this thing was going to last about 8 weeks, worst case, and then we'd be back to some sense of normalcy. And then we all sort of got really depressed because it didn't seem like it was ever going to end, and we didn't know what to do about it. Lots of vendors started saying, hey, I've got a solution for COVID. And it started becoming this issue of where do we place our bets? And then we just all started trying to listen to who was making the decisions and who was in the position to know what was really happening when it came to sports coming back online. I mentioned that our report went from broadcast enhancements, things that were really, interesting back in February, to a whole bunch of stuff. We have clients now, Bobble Sports, LiveLike, Promethean. They're focused on now, how do you make that remote experience so much more interactive? And I would say, Laura, and I'm going to direct this at you, some of the stuff like piping in crowd noise, new graphics, all the stuff that we've had to do to make live production seem exciting, probably wouldn't have made it to your desk before a pandemic. How much of your priorities have changed just in the way that you think about what to focus on at NBC Universal right now?
I think we've adapted. Everybody's been forced to adapt from sitting in your I'm happen to be in my childhood bedroom today working, which certainly wouldn't have been the case 6 months ago. But also just the way we approach innovation. And so many companies have sort of stepped back. We've really tried to focus on leaning in. We've launched products during the pandemic. We had to make tough decisions around do we wait? Our company launched Peacock. We launched a brand called LX, which is focused on reaching younger and new audiences in the local news space. So for us, we really focus on our consumer first. Not a new concept, but our decisions are based on what is our audience telling us, what do they want, what don't they like, and that is the number one driver for us and our product roadmap in terms of how do we innovate. And that's tough to do right now because there's lots of bright, shiny objects coming at us of, oh, we could try this or we could try that. And hey, we need to do VR, we need to do that. But if the consumer doesn't want it, we're just doing it to feed our egos as opposed to providing a value add to the audience. The other challenge we have in the broadcast business is we started by doing, we provided content to many people, a single piece of content. Now everybody wants their own experience, and they have demands that they make of us in terms of, I don't want it like everybody else has it. I want it the way I want it. And that's a much more challenging thing to provide to the consumer and create experiences that are relevant to the individual.
And you don't use the term Fluid Fan Studio because we made it up. But when we were talking about this internally and we said, who should join us on this call? We thought of you immediately because you do have more of an agile sort of organization and more of a design thinking approach to broadcast. Can you speak a little bit about like how you force the team to think differently about media convergence or interactivity? And Gina said this at the beginning, you have a really difficult challenge. You have to manage that traditional broadcast audience while giving the new audience something to play with and do. How do you do that on an ongoing basis?
I think you talked a little bit about broadcast and some of the challenges. And frankly, when I read the report, I was like, this is my business. And I personally think we do broadcasting live events and sports better than anybody. And there's a reluctance to change that to the idea that you guys pointed out. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if we aren't innovating, so we have to protect the core, but also move us forward. The benefit that we have in our business is we have what I describe as 42 Petri dishes. We've got stations all over the country, different sizes, different interests, and we can test and try something with a pretty low risk. We don't have a single brand where we're going out to market and it's a high risk. We can try something, see how it goes, and test and innovate. I think, we adopted an agile work environment and a legacy. Not every technology company out there is using agile. So or some iteration of it. But when we did it in our business, it was very new and uncertain. And so we've tried to bring as many people into the tent as we possibly can. When we do our PI planning, we invite everybody at our stations. We tell them to come join, see what our process is, be transparent about decision-making processes, what we're doing. And now we're trying to spread that love. So each quarter we try to bring new people into the tent and into the process. Recently, we brought our research team, we brought our design team. So it's not just the product and technology teams, our edit teams are part of that, our BD team is part of that, our ad ops team is part of that. And so the more people we have understanding how we think and how we build the products that we build, the better off the entire enterprise is.
And Matt, you have a very different role and responsibility than Laura does. She has to herd cats, she has to motivate, she has to paint a vision, she has to make sure things get done on time. You have to make bets, and you have to make big bets. You're responsible for some of the investments that Cox is making in this space and in other spaces that are adjacent to sports media and entertainment. But while Cox still owned the local O&Os, the local stations, and had a portfolio of media and communications, outlets. You invested in esports franchises. What was the thinking behind that? Was there some of this, fluid fan media convergence thinking that you wanted to take advantage of? Was there the idea that this new format was going to make its way onto traditional broadcast? Was there a thesis behind that?
Yeah, Josh, as you mentioned, Laura's trying to herd cats while I'm trying to add more cats to the flock for people like Laura to herd. So I'm trying to make your life more complicated. But I would say for us, Cox is a private company who's been around for 120 plus years. And our legacy, as you mentioned, is in media, starting with newspapers through the advent of radio, the advent of television, and now a cable platform. And, when we think about the future of entertainment for younger generations, esports jumps out as, one of the fastest growing spaces. It's very accessible. It's very relatable. There are hundreds of millions of people who play games and have an interest in watching others play games on a competitive format. So thinking about opportunities to, one, cater to our customers who are demanding innovative, forward-thinking content, but two, also being able to enter a space with a media background and expertise that Cox has, and hopefully contribute to the growth in that in some way, shape, and form. If you think about esports, historically, it's been a very digital format, right? People watch it online, they stream it online for free. And that's been the primary form of consumption for the hundreds of millions of viewers around the world. The leagues that we've invested in, Overwatch League and Call of Duty League with Activision Blizzard, they are trying to increase the live and local experience related to esports and competitive gaming. They've been making some great strides, and we were really excited with the progress and the two events that we've hosted in the Atlanta area over the last year or so. Unfortunately, the pandemic had kind of derailed those plans for 2020, but hopefully we'll be able to get back out that sooner rather than later. And the experience of watching something online and being able to interact and engage locally, you mentioned bringing the concept of immersion and presence together and finding the center point, where all those boxes intersect. There's interactivity that really drives your desire to continue to engage and continue to come back for more content. And that's what we've seen with esports and the opportunity to really grow the audience from where it is today.
One of the things I love about local, and again, this is really, regional sports networks and other sort of owned and operated outlets, and even what The Athletic has done with local journalism to write about sports. It's really changed the way that we get our stories. It's where we get our information. And Laura, you guys on the owned and operated level did some predict the game feature and functionality in Washington, D.C. We wrote about over a year ago now. And it was sort of the precursor for what you just did with PointsBet. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what that thinking is? I know it wasn't a deal specifically you did, but like NBC has the Olympics. I think people don't really kind of understand the entire portfolio that you guys play with within sports. We had just had Sam Flood on, and he was able to, really just kind of lay out an amazing portfolio of things that you guys are able to play with and work on when you think about things that Matt just talked about, which is the convergence of live events at a local level with some level of, gaming or social gaming or something like that. So again, I want to leave that door pretty open for you to take it in what direction you want, but like that PointsBet thing is about being more relevant in a community-based way in building interactivity.
Yeah, obviously, I think the Olympics are sort of the premier example of how our company comes together. And while we do talk about silos, and I think every enterprise has silos that exist that they have to try to work across, the Olympics is one where we really come together, and every part of the puzzle provides value to the larger business and to the advertiser and to the consumer. And so we have for years provided very local stories about the athletes. We focus on them. We do unique content across all of our platforms for them. The NBC Sports is providing the coverage day to day, and the RSNs plays in the middle between, we look at ourselves as providing news and relevant information to the audience about sports. The sports regionals are covering that local team and doing that with a ton of veracity. And then obviously NBC Sports is doing it at the macro level. And so we need to take that sort of model and apply it to these other things. And so you've seen the announcement last week with PointsBet that there are different parts to the businesses that are embracing this. And so while my team didn't work on that, our division will be part of that collaboration and working with the sports regionals, as well as the other brands across the sports portfolio. And as you know, we Mark Lazarus, who came from NBC Sports and is now over the broadcast and streaming business, he has that experience of bringing all of the different brands together to support these initiatives.
One of the things that I think underpins this concept of the Fluid Fan Studio is better intelligence about what the fan wants, what they're doing, this behavioral idea versus this demographic idea. If you look at, traditional broadcast ratings and households and, demographic data that you would normally get from, somebody that measures that, you really only get a snapshot of the personal identifiable information versus the behavioral. How do you both, and I'll start with you, Matt, think about how media's changed so that media companies get more of that first party data to learn about what their consumers are doing, what their viewers really want? Have you seen things, you guys just recently did an investment in caffeine. There's opportunities now to collect more first party data than just the set top box stuff or than just the, Nielsen ratings data that you get out there.
Yeah, I think, the general explosion in streaming online, that really enables you to grab more of that information. And it's a delicate balance because, of course, as a platform, as a broadcaster, you want as much information as you possibly can to understand your audience, to understand what they're interested in, beyond just what they're watching, but how to target them for future new content and what's relevant to them and what's interesting to them. But of course, there's the delicate balance because you certainly don't want to feel invasive, right? You don't want to alienate the viewer and make them feel like they're giving you, something that they don't want to give you. The beauty of caffeine that you mentioned, it's a social, interactive, live streaming platform, focused on broader entertainment, sports, and music, with a little bit of gaming thrown in there. And, they're able to understand, the age groups of the audience, where people are tuning in from, how different demographics are engaging with different feeds and different topics, and really, starting to build upon, what works best, what fits the broader audience, and then, what tailored content can they create for some of the communities that are really growing on the platform.
And Laura, you guys we just talked about this. I mean, a rich portfolio of opportunities to engage these fans. Now you're going to add some more, and you probably will continue as your company expands its reach in the space. How do you deal with getting a single view of that viewer, that customer, right? And it's a cliche in the business to say we want that single view in our CRM system to know that Josh Walker cares about all these things. But if I'm over here on PointsBet and I'm watching on Peacock and then I've got my Comcast X1 thing over here, I'm everywhere for you. Do you have data at your disposal to make some of the decisions we are recommending in this research to say, focus on behaviors? Can you see what behaviors are sort of coming out of your consumer base?
Yeah, that's something that the company spent a lot of time in the last couple of years working on, and being able to sort of bring all of the different brands together and cross-pollinate. We created a single app before we launched Peacock that had all the entertainment brands, and that was really the first opportunity to gather audience information in the way that you're describing, as opposed to sort of one-dimensional demographic or very transactional insights. So, we've made progress there. Obviously, the companies, Facebook, Google, the FANG companies are very sophisticated at doing it, and so it's that idea of how do we make sure we're collecting the right information about our audience so that we can leverage it across all of the portfolio, but also take advantage of the larger data sets and partnerships. And we talked about this a little bit before, figuring out from a technology standpoint, who are you partnering with, and knowing what you can do really well, and also knowing areas that you probably should partner as opposed to trying to go on your own.
And so I'm going to just turn to some of the questions that are coming in, because Mark and Tom have two that I think are relevant. I'll start with Tom's, and I'll give you guys a second to think about this. It's really, I mean, obviously we can't talk about this unless we talk about the advertising model that underpins a lot of this media innovation. The interrupted nature of the, commercial, the intrusiveness of that brand message. We have tons of research from the brands that we work with, Coca-Cola, Visa, MasterCard, that say they want to be helping power the experience, not be interjected into it, right? And the people that we work with are at the strategy level that are like, we need to continue to push our organization to think differently about how we bring those experiences to life. And a lot of brands have acted as publishers now, right? They've started to create their own content, their own brand, because they want to have branded content out there. They don't want to have commercials. How do you guys both think about how the ad model changes, Matt, either from an investment thesis, like what platforms you think are interesting from an investment standpoint because they've cracked the code, or that you see them cracking the code on some of these new ad experiences or branded content experiences? And then Laura, more from how do you guys think about what you're doing to minimize the commercial breaks and improve the sort of branded opportunities for your advertisers and sponsors? Matt, why don't we start with you on the investment side? Have you seen anything that is addressing this most directly?
I think that's kind of $1 million question, right? I think, that's something that a lot of people are trying to think through. How do you integrate advertising and activation within an audience, without detracting from the experience of watching an event?
Well, on the esports side specifically, right? Esports has done a pretty good job of having the monetization and the microtransactions occur in this window of interactivity that sits side by side with the stream. Is that something, you guys looked at and said, hey, that's something we could use in the media side of the business, or we want to see more of that, or this is an attractive reason to invest in these franchises? Was there anything around the ad model or the media model around that gave you excitement?
Yeah, look, I think, with esports, if you think about the digital underpinnings of watching a video game, there's opportunities that we've seen companies going after, actually inserting advertising and branding within a stream of a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that, wouldn't normally appear, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a Coca-Cola logo,
Mm-hmm.
plastered onto a wall as graffiti, and it looks natural. It looks like it could have been part of the natural game design. It's really, trying to activate, in a natural and authentic way, right? I think that's authenticity for the younger generations, and in particular within the esports community is a key. The fans, the audience, they don't want to, have a commercial for a headset or for, a keyboard or mouse, that they claim to be great for gameplay and esports, but they want to see, oh, look, my favorite player, my favorite team, they are using this headset, and that's the headset that they trust as they go into competition. That's the type of product placement and advertising that we've seen in the esports space that's had the most success. I think anytime you can integrate it into a natural, view, but also kind of demonstrate, the usability and the proof point, that's where the esports community has responded the most. And
Laura, is there something that's come across your desk over the last 18 months that you said to yourself, wow, this is different? I'm seeing a sea change, because again, look, this is a tired conversation, and I appreciate Tom asking the question because it's an important one, but we get the same response. If it ain't broke, it ain't, don't try to fix it. The upfronts are the upfronts, and there's all this stuff but is there anything you're seeing that really does play to what Matt was just talking about, that there is some form of interactivity or new monetization model that might change significantly the way you do what you do?
I mean, listen, our company's done a lot around ad innovation, and it's been very public in terms of pods and length of commercial breaks and making sure that the consumers are getting the ads that they want. I do think in the local broadcast space, there are challenges. We're doing news. We aren't doing sports on a on a day-to-day basis in our newscasts. And so we have news policies and guidelines that we have to stay within. There's broadcasters that are playing with obviously subscription models, much like newspapers have been doing. That Facebook has leaned very heavily into that in terms of supporting that kind of thing because they want to use their platform. Mm-hmm. And so, those are things to test and try. I haven't seen anybody coming out of the gate saying this is the path to the future. Whether it's loyalty programs, there's a variety of things that have been played around with. None of which I'm super bullish on. I do think ultimately, and I can give an example, something that we bring complete value to our audience around is creating tent poles that we can tie to the network that we can activate locally through experiences. So we do an annual event. This is not in the sports world, but it could be an example called Clear the Shelters, where all of our stations, both English and Spanish language, provide opportunity for people to adopt animals. Advertisers want to get around that. It's a feel-good thing. They have broadcast exposure. They have digital exposure. And this year we had to pivot. We did a fundraiser. We ended up raising, I think, close to $1.8 million. And we've adopted over 1 million dogs in the last, and so frankly, we didn't know going into the pandemic, there were already people adopting lots of dogs and shelters were empty, but we ended up pivoting the business, had great support from the sponsors. And, we did a month-long campaign instead of a weekend campaign. It was very successful. So those kinds of opportunities to connect to our communities, to connect to our audience and connect advertisers to it have been, and I don't see that not ever not being effective.
So let me see if I can connect the dots with some of our other research, and then we'll wrap up here. We also focus a lot on athlete-driven media, and that's the opportunity for athletes to really reach the direct consumer through their own social channels and their own, direct channel to the consumer, whether it's them streaming or whether it's them on social media, wherever it is that they are. As even an amateur athlete now with name, image, and likeness at the college level and amateur level, they're able to monetize their brand a little bit more directly. So Mark asked this question, and it's a good one because it's tied to this concept of NBC's Shop TV kind of technology, and it has a lot to do with the esports stuff we were just talking about. Esports, talent and competitive video gamers, influencers have been very good at monetizing through microtransactions and the live stream, the live broadcast. How do you see that kind of coming to fruition in the next few years? Is there going to be more shopping that's done during live media and entertainment?
It's interesting you say that because the next call I have after this is about topicals. So
I can guarantee you won't be as much fun as this one, Laura.
So certainly, again, our company, we have lots of great brands that people have incredible affinities for. They did some testing last week around sci-fi and offering and have had some really good traction in terms of conversions. So it's an area we're looking at. It's an area that we can provide directly to advertisers and take out the middleman. So again, we're placing lots of bets. And I always make this analogy, as I'm a lover of analogies. Growth is by 1,000 opportunities. If you say death by 1,000 cuts, growth is by 1,000 opportunities. I don't think there's one thing that is going to push our business in the direction of distinct and absolute success. It will be all of these incremental efforts and seeing which ones grow the fastest. And we need to be placing bets. And I think it's interesting that Matt said that he's the one placing the bets and I'm the one having to implement them. But I love that. I think we need to be trying lots of different things, but being smart about it, right? They have to run through our funnel of what's valuable to our business and what we think we can do well. And I see that happening a lot where a vendor will come in and say, and pitch their business, and we'll say, well, that's not exactly how we would use it. And they'll say, well, we can adapt to what you do. And I usually say, no, thank you. I don't want to change your business model. But if it's not a fit, it's not a fit, and that's okay. When you do find the fit, it's fantastic, and those are the bets that you want to be placing.
Well, I think that's the whole concept behind the Fluid Fan Studio, in the sense that you have a group that can make those bets and try those things, because I think what you just said is so well spoken in terms of just the philosophy of how this thing, the whole industry has to look for one thing to fix something. They have to be like, okay, what's our priority? What's our goal? And that almost runs antithetical to what you just said, which is like, we have to be doing all these other things too. We can't just make one bet. And that just doesn't bode very well for you, Matt, because you're the one who has to deploy the capital.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to thank you both for doing this. We're very proud of the research that this leadership board helped us produce. We think that with a new organization, with a new opportunity to look at live sports, entertainment, and media as a convergence play, there's a lot more urgency now in the industry to take the philosophy you just articulated, Laura, and make some of the bets, Matt, that you have to make on an ongoing basis, because we can't keep doing things the old-fashioned way. We just can't. And nothing has made that more clear than when there's no fans in the stadium, and we're piping in crowd noise to try to emulate something that really just doesn't feel right. So I want to thank you both for doing this. I want to ask you both to do something really important, which is to stay safe and stay well. And we will be in touch with both of you again soon. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming today. Again, if you haven't read the report, you can go to our website, download it with all of our other research as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Josh.
Josh. Thanks for having us.
Be well.